Well, hey there, happy innovators. How are you all doing, huh? What are you up to? Are you up to no good? Probably not. Oh man, what can I say? It's been a rough year or two for me, emotionally and, as you probably remember from my last podcast, I had explained that I had lost my father. My father died and was kind of dealing with that. Well, believe it or not, in the interim between releasing my last podcast and this one that I'm doing right now, unfortunately, I also lost my mother. Yeah. Can you believe that? Within 5 or 6 months of each other, my parents both died. And I don't really want to talk about that too much today. I don't want the Singularity Podcast to be like morose or, a downer all the time, but it would be kind of intellectually dishonest to not at least mention it right now, which I already have. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Just, going through a difficult time, but it's not all bad. Life is not all bad. I have a lot of good things going on and a lot of positive changes taking place, So here we go, onward and upward with the Singularity Podcast. It's been kind of bothering me that there's these huge gaps of time in between my podcasts, and I'm kind of like, at least silently in my mind, in my interior, resolving to change that. It's good to do a podcast. It's good to communicate. If I can't be releasing music, right, then hey, why not just do this? At least do a podcast. And oh man, I did an episode of the Mike TV. I did a huge episode. I put in so much time and effort. It was awesome. It's like a 2-hour video, for Mike TV. And I just covered so many songs, and it was great. I really tried, and when I uploaded it to YouTube, it turns out that a lot of the music that I chose was just blocked worldwide. Like, I'm not allowed to use it. So I don't know if something changed at YouTube recently or what. I'm not really too good with all that stuff, but the long and the short of it is that, I had this awesome video that I had produced, and it was so funny. I had some great stuff in there. And I had to, just kind of like omit it. Like, that's it. YouTube decided for me that I wouldn't be able to release it. And then I kind of looked at the breakdown of what songs specifically were blocked. And, out of maybe like 20 or 25 songs, or 30 songs maybe even, only like 5 of them or 6 of them were, able to be shared. So I edited that video down to just those songs, and I re-uploaded it, and to no avail. There was still blockage on some of the stuff, and I just figured, screw it. I'm going to have to figure out some way around that to keep the Mike TV thing going, because I think it's a good idea, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people about it, because it's, not the kind of thing I make any money off of, it's just fun to do. And frankly, I don't let money dictate whether I do something or not. If an idea is there and it's good, I think that it's worthy of my effort and my attention, then you know what? I'm going to go right ahead and do it. So I'll find some way, at least I'm hoping to find some way of continuing with the Mike TV idea. And I suppose I should mention, to those of you who are not familiar with Mike TV, like maybe this is your first podcast you're listening to from me, Mike Bostwick of Pipe Choir Records. Well, I started to do this thing a few months back, where I would just play music and I would comment or have commentary over the songs. And they were famous songs. They weren't from unknown artists or anything like that. But, it's just the world we live in and the way that licensing is and copyright is in the world. It's so lame and so old-fashioned and stupid. It's a shame that not everybody can be a Creative Commons artist, in my opinion. This stuff like music and art and those things should be free to use or to comment over, or to, have fair use of this music. And, maybe that's my in. Maybe fair use is a claim that I could make, but I don't know. The record companies are so screwed up on this front that it's like it might take them years to figure it out, even if they can. They may never be able to figure it out, but oh well. What am I going to do about it? I'm just going to work on new pipe choir music, new PC3 music, do my thing and put it out there and let people use it for free if they want, and maybe, hopefully, eventually, other people will catch on to that and it'll head in a different direction. Maybe not, but time will tell. And, like I said, I lost both my parents in the past 6 months, and it's got me thinking about this thing where, there's this myth about living in the suburbs, suburbia, the area outside of a metropolitan region, that surrounds it. This idea that living in the suburbs of a city is somehow like bad or shameful or like really lame and, or whatever, not cool, and I hear that a lot. I have always heard that, on television, from rock stars and movie stars, this kind of like mocking living in the suburbs, like it's the dregs, the worst people and really lame, man, that kind of thing. And I've always been kind of offended by that because it's not an accurate assessment of what living in the suburbs is like. And, I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, and I had a great life there. It was awesome. Like, my father had grown up in the inner city of Cleveland and, the lower parts of town. And, he worked his way out of that area and into the suburbs. It was like he was breaking through. He was getting out into the suburbs, and he provided such a great life for us, all of us kids. All the kids in that town really had a great existence in that suburb. And this idea that it's not cool or not good or somehow, it's something to be avoided, living in the suburbs, being from the suburbs. I don't know. I think it's kind of bullshit, and I hear it a lot. I've been hearing it a lot. And, it's kind of funny. I have this memory. This one time I was riding the bus from downtown Cleveland to the place where I lived in the suburb. And behind me, there were these two businessmen that were sitting on the bus, and they were talking. They didn't realize that I could hear them. And they were talking about the area that I grew up in, and in a really derogatory way, and they must have lived in a wealthier suburb of Cleveland, But I'm sitting there listening to these guys just go on and on about how awful it was, in this town and in this area, and oh, it's just the worst, and it's, whatever. The same thing I've heard from celebrities and rock stars my whole life, But I think about that from time to time, those two guys and that ride on the bus, listening to these people. It was like the disillusionment of where I was from, or the first time I had ever heard somebody talk like that about where I lived specifically, my hometown and my area. But both my wife and I grew up there, and it was excellent. And I suppose, I'm bringing it up because, I went back to Cleveland for my mother's funeral, okay? And it was kind of strange because my mom had been sick for a long time, and we were all kind of expecting her. Actually, we were expecting her to pass on before my father did. My father was much stronger and healthier than my mom was. And, that's not how the cookie crumbled. My dad died first, and then months later, my mom. And I didn't realize that when I was going back to Cleveland for my mother's funeral, really what I was going back for was the funeral for Cleveland, like in my heart, in my spirit and in my mind. What do I mean by that? Well, I can explain it to you, because some of you out there may be able to relate to what I'm saying. You know what? Let me get a sip of my coffee here. I suggest that if you have a cup of coffee yourself, that you grab it and take a sip. So just hang on, cheers. Here we go. Oh man. I've got a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee today. They just make the best coffee. I know I've talked about it before, but man, there's a reason why this company is so successful in America. And it's because they make a great cup of coffee. Hang on. Just a straight up, simple cup of hot coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing exotic. No special flavors or anything. Just a typical cup of coffee, Dunkin' Donuts. And this podcast is not sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts, by the way. Although they should probably be paying me something, right? For promoting it as much as I do. But I'm going to take another sip. Hang on. Oh, man. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Okay. I was talking about my mom's funeral and how it was really a funeral for Cleveland. And what I mean by that is like when I would go back to Cleveland, I would visit my parents' house. Like that's where I would go, I might see my brothers, I might see my sister, I might see my nieces and nephews or something. But when I arrived in Cleveland, I would go to my parents' house, and that's where everybody would kind of like meet. And I would spend time with my parents. It was really, I guess the point of what I'm saying is it was really about like that house, my parents, that whole thing was kind of like a touchstone for me, a neutral zone. It wasn't somebody else's house. It was the house I grew up in. I was comfortable there. I was able to, walk around and pretty much do whatever I wanted to do, just be comfortable, grab a drink out of the fridge, hug and kiss my parents, maybe grab a bite to eat, watch TV with my dad, or, whatever. I felt at home and comfortable there. And like after my father died, my mother was in a nursing home. Okay. So the house was empty. And, the idea was that we were going to have to sell the house after my father died. My mom wasn't going to be there ever again. And, they didn't want to leave the house empty and all that, liquidate all the assets, that kind of stuff with the estate when someone dies, and what that meant to me really was the end. Okay, that was like the end of that part of my life. Like from here on in, when I go back to Cleveland, especially now since my mother died, there's really nothing for me there. I do have family there, and I love all those people, but it really is the end of that part of my life. I live in a different state. I live very far away anyway. So, I'm not really affected like in the here and now, but that realization that as we were lowering my mother's casket into the ground, really what was happening was my relationship with that whole city, that whole area, everything was being lowered down into the grave too. Like with my mother died my ties and my relationship with that city. It's gone, and it's really kind of a heavy thing to consider, because it's important, right? Like where you grew up, where you live, the house that you grew up in, all those things, especially if you had a good childhood, you had a good and fruitful younger life, which I think I did. It was awesome. Like I was saying earlier about living where I lived, it wasn't downtown Cleveland, but there were a lot of really cool little things in this city that I lived in. The ice cream shop, the donut shop, that deli that I used to go to, or where I used to work, at the print shop, or just all kinds of things. Like every memory I have, all the things of, from age 25 and younger, was all a snapshot of this region. Everything happened there, and I do feel bad about it. I think I would feel worse if I lived closer. I have a sense of detachment being this far away. Maybe some of you out there listening to this can relate to what I'm talking about. I hope so. I hope so. It's a weird thing. Is it the end of the world? No. I guess, I've been thinking to myself, like, I'm focusing less on the past now. I don't really want to think about the way it used to be, or the nostalgia, attached to that city and all those things, and the younger years, and it was so fun, and remember when, and all this. I don't really want to do that anymore. It's really turning into this idea of looking forward into the future. I don't want to remember. I don't want to think about it anymore. I used to do that a lot, like a lot. I'm a very emotional person. I'm a very sentimental person. So, I would look back with happiness and pride, and gratitude to my parents for providing that kind of life for me as a kid, in the suburbs that are just so horrible. It's like bullshit. It was great, man. It was great when I was growing up. It was. But that part of my life, even though I'm 50 years old now, actually 52, I just turned 52. I'm old now. But just now, really, that kind of idea, this idea of holding on to the past is really kind of over, at least for the time being. Maybe at some point in the future, I'll have the desire to think about it again or to want to remember, but right now, the memories are either very painful and sad, or they're just pointless. There's no point in remembering anymore. That sounds so final, but it really kind of is, and it's shocking. It's a shock to the system to, within just 6 months, to lose not just my father, but my mother and the house that I grew up in. It's all gone. It's gone. I still kind of sometimes can't believe it. It happened so quickly, and my head is spinning, from it, But like I said, it's not the end of the world. It's sad, yes. I feel bad. Yes, I do. I would be lying if I said otherwise, but I don't know. At some point in our lives, for all of us, for everybody listening to this right now, for some of you, it may have happened earlier when you were younger. Some of you may be much older than me and it still hasn't ended, hasn't happened yet. But here I am, I'm not immune. I'm like everybody else. My parents were, even though they were married for 65 years, 65 years, over half of a century together. Can you imagine, while I'm thinking about it, really, I kind of thought, I had this thought about a year ago, where it's like my mother and father lived together for 65 years, okay? And I have a really strong belief about that kind of thing, where if you spend that much time with somebody, you've heard people say it before, right? Where the two kind of become one. I know it's a biblical thing too. It says it in the Bible that when two people are married, the two become one. Well, I think that that's true. And with my parents, it was they started to kind of look the same, and they started to kind of be the same size. It's weird how things like that can happen. The two people together for that long just kind of assimilate into each other, and also too, there's this idea that when people are that close, they've been married for that long, that when one of them dies, the other one dies soon after. They're not meant to really be separated, and originally when all this shook down, after my parents got the vax and got boosted, my mom got really sick, okay? And my father, for the first time in 65 years, was contending with this idea that he's in the house alone. The person who was always with him for 65 years is no longer there. She's still alive, but she's somewhere else now. And I think that my father started to kind of change emotionally. And, actually it was kind of according to the testimony of my brothers and my sister and my other family members, my father started to kind of deteriorate, his patience level, or his ability to kind of reason and to be rational. He lost a little bit of that. And I had suggested that maybe that was because naturally, this man was adjusting to life without this other person there all the time. You know, my family members seem to think that that was probably not the case, or they hadn't thought about it like that, but they were dealing with my father and his changing temperament. You know, he was changing, but I think he was just bewildered, you know, probably on some really deep, profound level, not coping with this idea very well, that he's on his own for the first time, really like for the first time in his life, you know? So my father got sick as well. And I think that maybe this idea, this state that he was in of being separated from my mother contributed to that, you know? And I'd like to think, at least I always liked to think, you know, when I was younger and I would imagine the day when my parents weren't there anymore, you know, I imagined that they would go together, you know. I think it would have been really pitiful and really sad and really kind of hard to deal with if one of my parents would have been alone for a really long time. You know, I don't think that they would have done well. And I remember being younger and I would imagine, okay, someday this will happen, and what will it be like, and how will I feel, and how old will I be? How old will they be? Who's going to go first, mom or dad? Like, what will happen? What will it be like? Now all that is behind me, and I can kind of look at it with a fresh kind of, and, you know, realistic vantage point. You know, I can study it and think about it and ponder what has happened and how it happened. And I think that I'm grateful, believe it or not. Like when my mother passed away, I was sad. Yes, of course, she's my mom, you know, but I was glad, kind of like glad that she was with my dad. You know, like they weren't meant to be separated. And every single person at my mother's funeral was kind of singing that same song. Like everybody that knew my parents personally, and, you know, they all kind of were saying the same thing. Like they were one of those couples, man, you know, where they're not meant to be separated. They truly were soulmates, you know, and everybody knew that. They had been together for so long. They never had a rocky period. They never had a time where they wanted to separate or anything like that. They just had harmony for 65 years, you know? So part of me was kind of like relieved that they were together. They went together. I think I would rather have it that way. And that's why I'm not overwhelmingly sad about the death of my mother, because I kind of feel like maybe my dad paved the way. Maybe he was waiting for her, and, you know, he greeted her, you know. And, you know, I'm going to also share with you another story. It's kind of a weird one, and a very personal one too, but hell, why not? We're talking about this now, right? Here I am. Let me get another sip of my coffee. Hang on. Oh man. Good. A long time ago, after I was born and after my little brother was born, my mother got pregnant again. Okay, my mom had 6 children. Okay, and my mom was like one of those ladies that never wanted to work. She didn't want to be, you know, independent and have a job or anything like that. She didn't want to be professional. All she wanted to do was be a mom. That was all she wanted to do. And that's exactly what she was all of her life. So she had this affinity for little kids, for children, having children. And so when my mother got pregnant for the 7th time, okay, she was, of course, like really excited and really happy. She was going to have another baby, another child. And she was such a good mom. She was such a good mom that way. She really was. We were very lucky, all of us were, to have her like that. I mean, a woman that just loves being a mom, and, we gave her a run for her money, trust me. 4 boys, 2 girls and 4 boys. My mom had her hands full. But anyway, I digress. The point I'm making is that she got pregnant again. And this time, unfortunately, there were a lot of complications on the day of the delivery of the baby. And my little brother, who had gone full term, okay, with my mom, actually wound up dying, okay? And I was, of course, like too young to even know any of this was going on. Like, I didn't even know. But my mother was extremely heartbroken by this event. I can't overstate how disappointed she was and how sad my mother was by this. Even, many years later, like every single year around that time, around the day that happened, my mom would kind of like sink into this really deep kind of like depression, like darkness and sad and emotional and kind of crabby, and she would snap at us and that kind of thing, because she was dealing with the loss of that baby, even though she had 6 of us, you know what I mean? She lost this little baby, and it ruined her, really. She was functional, and she was, my mom. She was baking cookies, and we had a home-cooked meal every night. My father ate dinner with us every night. We had rules, we weren't allowed to eat until Dad sat down first, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was like, it was a very pleasant and very disciplined and organized situation revolving around like this respect for my parents, But, my mom, she would go every year, right around that date, Eventually we kind of figured it out. Like, oh yeah, that's right. She had a stillbirth right around that time. And it just was like the strangest thing. Well, my father would always tell me, when we talked about it, he would always tell me that my little brother, because my father was the only person who really saw him, and he was the only person who went to the funeral for this little baby. My father would always tell me that this baby looked like me, but it had dark hair. I had blonde hair. This one had dark hair. And he had a name. His name was Thomas. And he had a little headstone, and it was a tangible thing. Like it was a part of our life, even though we didn't think about it all the time, and we didn't think about Thomas all the time. My mom did. And so that he never really died. He was like alive in our house in that way, if you can understand what I mean. Maybe this is too personal to be sharing. I don't know. I don't think so, though. Who cares now? It's all said and done. Well, we know what's weird is my mother and my father wanted to be buried in a different cemetery than the one that my family had traditionally used for, probably like 100 years. Like everybody in my family grandmas, grandpas, cousins, my sister, they're all buried in the same cemetery. But my parents decided they wanted to be buried somewhere else. So they had my little brother, Thomas, they had his grave exhumed. They had him moved to this other cemetery where they were going to be buried, and he would be buried with them. Okay? And, we're at the funeral for my mom, The priest says his prayers. Everything is kind of done. Everybody takes off because it's time to eat, right? So they all get in their cars and they're driving to the place where they're going to have food. And for my wife and myself, it's always been kind of like something I've insisted on. Like we'll stay until they cover the grave. Like I'll stay and watch over the grave until it is covered. Okay? So check this out. I'm sitting there with my wife in the car. We're the only car there, in the cemetery. And the guys are working, the crew that's breaking down the tent they had and all that stuff. They're picking everything up, moving on to the next thing. And, getting ready to literally bury my mom, to cover it up, And I'm talking to this funeral director guy. I had talked to him when my dad died a few months back. So, he remembered me. And we were sitting there talking, and he says, hey, by the way, if you see that hearse right over there, that has the casket for your little brother in it. And I'm like, what? Like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's right there. If you stay, you'll be able to see them put his casket in there with your mom. And I was like, oh, get the hell out of here. No way, no way. And sure enough, I stayed, I watched. There was a little teeny tiny little casket, for my little brother. And they put him right in there with my mom. Oh, and it was just such a weird thing. Like, Thomas, this baby that I've been hearing about for all these years, is actually real. You know what I mean? Like, I'm seeing it. He's here. And he's with my mom right now. In the ground. Like, they're together. My mom's casket was there in the vault, and then they put his little casket on top, the little vault, and that's it. Mom, Dad, and Thomas. They're all buried together, And, I don't know. I kind of felt like I was privileged, to see that. Everybody else was so, into like, food. That's what people do. When there's a get together of any kind, it's like food becomes like the grand finale. We're all coming together for like what? Like a funeral or a wedding or something. But really what it boils down to is like free food, So, I forego that, I'm not interested in that. And I was just so glad. And I guess I kind of felt that it was in some small way, like a communication from my mom and my dad and my little brother and maybe God too, that I was witnessing this, there was a gift that I was able to see that. Nobody else was there, just me and my wife. That's it. All the other family was gone. And, oh man, am I glad I stayed. Stayed behind like I usually do, just to make sure that things get closed up properly. And, it's kind of like in some ways like the Jewish people do. They call it sitting Shiva. When someone dies, I think that's what they call it. Someone will watch over the body until it is buried. They have somebody sitting there, guarding the body to make sure that everything is okay and nothing is done to the body that's not kosher or whatever, I kind of see it like that, Like, if no one else is willing to do that, to take that extra time, I'll do it, Especially for, well, I would do it for anybody, but especially for my parents, So, yeah. Strange things. Very, very weird time, but not so sad, really. I think I felt worse when my father died because I just loved that guy. I had such a great dad. I mean, what can I say? And I will never know somebody as kind as my father again. I will never know somebody like that again. He was not like anybody else. Not even like my mom. My mom had her moments where it was it was a little difficult sometimes, but it was never like that with my dad. Not once. So I felt bad when he died. I felt worse, I guess. I felt more relieved when my mom died because she wasn't alone here anymore. She was with my dad. That's where she belongs. They're that kind of couple. So that's all I'm going to say about that today. Now I'm going to tell you something else here. I want to end this podcast with this. First of all, I want to apologize for kind of being away from the microphone as long as I have. Okay, it's really not cool. I don't like it. I mean, it's been nice having the time to think and to reflect and all that. But I really am kind of disappointed with myself, and should be doing better than that. So I'm really going to try in the near future to do, the Singularity Podcast in a much more consistent way, at least more consistent than I have been doing in the recent year or past couple of years or whatever, I'm sorry about that, I know that some of you really kind of dig me doing this, and I do too. And, my wife pointed out to me just last night, she's like, you realize you've been doing this podcast for 7 years? And I was like, no way. I haven't been doing it for 7 years. It's only been 3 years or something like that. Sure enough, I went back to the date of the very first podcast I did, and it was 7 years ago, man. I've been doing this thing for 7 years. I am stunned that much time has gone by. And, there have been times when I've wanted to stop. There have been times when I've kind of cooled it a little bit. I didn't really, jam on the podcast thing. And there were times when I was just cranking them out too, I suppose. And I don't think it's necessarily bad that I've done it the way I've done it, but there's a part of me, a very real part of me, that's kind of regretting that I'm not more consistent. So I wanted to say at the end of this podcast that you should be looking forward to getting, many more of the Singularity podcasts and in a more timely fashion. And this thing, as far as I'm concerned, at this moment in time, the Singularity Podcast will never end. Okay? So if you guys ever wonder to yourselves, is he ever going to do a podcast again? The answer is yes. Unless I'm not alive myself, yes, I will be doing one. And, I have new pipe choir music coming. I have a new album I'm going to be releasing before too long. I have 3 PC3 albums that I'm going to be releasing very soon. I'm having some issues with distribution right now. All kinds of stuff like that, licensing, copyright, distribution. There's always some kind of sticking point, some kind of bullshit I have to deal with, in order to just get it out there. But I'll do what I gotta do. It'll take however long it takes, but don't think for a second that I've quit or I'm not going to continue or whatever. There may be a large break, a large gap in time when there's no activity, but trust me, folks, I'll be doing this stuff until I can't anymore, So, anyway, my happy innovators, until next time, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Take it easy. And thank you for your patience. Okay, happy innovators. I got some music for you at the end of this podcast. I'm going to share with you something I've never done before, as far as I know. I'm going to share with you a song that I'm currently working on for pipe choir. It's not finished. It's maybe, close to being finished, but it's not finished. It's not a finished track. And I don't normally like to share music until it's finished. But I figured, you guys have had to wait for a new podcast for so long, and I've been so inconsistent. I've decided I'm going to do something for you that I've never done before. So without further ado, here we go. It's a new song I'm working on. Actually, it's an old song that I've redone that no one has ever heard before. It's from a long time ago. It's a song called Don't Cry, and I'm pretty proud of this one, actually. It's coming along really well, and you'll be able to hear it in the unfinished state that it is, and maybe it'll take on more meaning in the future. When you do hear the finished version, you'll be able to compare the two, maybe. That's how I am. That's what I would do. So without further ado, here we go. Pipe choir, Don't Cry. Take it easy, everybody.
Won't you come to